Pinocchio, the dark true story Disney hid. The rope creaked once, twice, then settled. The puppet dangled from the oak, head slumped, legs still. Wind moved the leaves, he moved no more. This isn't Disney. This is how Carlo Collodi ended his story at first. A warning to boys in a hard, hungry Italy. A moral hammer, not a lullaby. We're going to walk the brutal path beat by beat. The dead cricket, the hanging, the land of toys, the fire, the betrayals, and the work that finally redeems him. To understand a puppet's death sentence, we need to meet his maker and the country that put a knife in his hand. Florence, debt, and a newspaper serial. Collodi's world. Florence in the 1880s smelled like ink, street dust, and debt. Carlo Lorenzini, he signed as Collodi, after the village where his mother came from had already lived a few lives. He defought and wrote for Italy's unification, watched kings and ministers trade promises, and discovered that freedom didn't cancel hunger. Journalism paid the rent when it could. Satire kept his mind sharp, but bills have a way of winning. Italy was young, loud, and anxious. The Risorgimento had stitched a nation together out of city-states and pride, but stitching doesn't mean healing. Schools were scarce, factories were growing, and boys like Pinocchio, quick to laugh, quicker to run, bounced between street corners and stern classrooms. Censorship was loosening, but expectations were tightening. The new state needed citizens who could read, work, and obey. Parents needed help getting there. Collodi knew that tension. He'd written school books and seen how little they stuck. He didn't want to preach, he wanted to poke. When Il Giorno per I Bambini asked for a serial for children, he saw his lane, something fast, sharp, and useful. Useful mattered to him. If a story didn't help a child survive, what was it for? Deadlines shaped the bones. Each installment had to end with a punch. Cliffhangers didn't just keep readers, they brought letters, outrage, debate. You can hear the editor's pencil tapping, make them care, make them come back. Collodi obliged with a black comedy dressed as a fable. Hunger wasn't a theme, it was a character. Punishment wasn't abstract. It was cold nights, empty cupboards, and a judge who'd send you to prison for being foolish. Get this, his audience wasn't only kids. Middle-class parents read over shoulders. Teachers clipped scenes for lessons. The tone is a tightrope, jokes with splinters in them. He made fun of everyone, policemen who shrug at justice, doctors who consult their own importance, and children who think freedom means walking into traffic with a grin. The laugh lands, then the bruise blooms. He also understood performance. Theater was everywhere, puppet shows in squares, cheap stages with loud promises. A puppet was the perfect vessel, wood that wants to be more than wood. The metaphor writes itself, but Collodi refuses easy grace. No star grants a wish here. The knife carves, the feet walk, the stomach growls, and when a choice goes wrong, someone pays. Meanwhile, the letter pile grew. Collodi's early Pinocchio was a scourge. He killed the talking cricket with a hammer. He sold his ABC book for a ticket to the puppet theater. He ran from school, lied for coins, and walked straight into a noose. When Collodi ended a chapter with a body swinging and the sentence, "He moved no more," readers revolted. Parents complained. The editor pressed him. He'd made his point. Now bring the puppet back and teach him to stand up. That push and pull, satire versus pedagogy, shaped the second half. The blue fairy enters not as a wand, but as a shifting figure. Child, sister, mother, she offers care with conditions. Doctors examine truth like a patient. Lies grow where everyone can see them. Collodi's world believes in mercy, but never for free. You repay it with work, school, and sacrifice. Not once, not in a montage, but day after day until splinters become calluses. Look at the economics under the pages. Jeppetto is poor enough to pawn his coat so his boy can read. He shivers and smiles anyway. That's the ledger Collodi keeps open through every chapter. What's spent? What's earned? Who carries the weight? When Pinocchio squanders a chance, the cost isn't abstract. It's the old man's blue lips in winter, it's soup stretched to water, it's shame that lingers longer than hunger. It's also Italy's ledger. A nation can't run on mischief. Factories need hands that show up. Schools need students who don't sell their books for music and lights. Collodi isn't scolding for sport. He's trying to build citizens out of chaos, one serialized shock at a time. He knows kids don't listen to sermons. They listen to consequences. There's a reason the jokes bite. Black comedy lets the lesson slip past defenses. You laugh when a pompous figure trips. You listen when the ground's missing under your own feet. Collodi uses that rhythm like a drum. Temptation, shortcut, punishment, chance at repair. Every vice attracts a predator. Every lie grows, every broken promise returns with interest, and yet he leaves a window open. Compassion appears in rough clothing, a fire eater with tears in his beard, a fairy who demands school before comfort, a boy who learns to carry water until his shoulders know the load. The world is cruel. It's also watching, ready to help when effort meets honesty. To understand a puppet carved into citizenship, start where Collodi starts, not with a star, but with a log that talks. Hunger enters the room with it. Pride sits down across the table. A knife flashes. Choices are born. Now, before wishes, before songs, before safety nets, the wood opens its mouth and trouble walks in. The birth of a disobedient log. Master Antonio, Mastro Cherry, wasn't looking for miracles. He wanted a sturdy plank, something that wouldn't split under a plane. The shop smelled of sap and stale wine. He laid the log on the bench, raised his tool, and heard it, a faint laugh. He froze. Another scrape, and the log sighed like a bored child. Superstition pricked the back of his neck. He tapped the wood. It answered with a tiny ow. He did what people do when fear walks in. He looked for someone to hand it to. Jeppetto shuffled into the doorway, pockets empty, temper thin, pride intact. They'd traded barbs for years, mockeries about wigs and poverty, little insults that bruise more than they bleed. Need sharpened their words. Jeppetto asked for a piece of wood to make a puppet that might earn him bread as a street performer. Cherry, eager to shut the mystery in someone else's house, offered the talking log with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Back in Jeppetto's narrow room, 4 walls, 1 window, winter waiting, he put the log on the table. Tools came out like old friends. The knife touched bark and the wood giggled. Jeppetto muttered a prayer and kept carving. A forehead emerged, then eyes that rolled before he'd finished them. A nose that shot forward like it had a mind of its own. When he carved the mouth, the first thing the puppet did was stick out his tongue. Get this, before the legs, before manners, the head was already arguing. Jeppetto begged for patience. He wanted a son who could dance, sing, maybe flip on a rope. The knife moved faster. He carved the feet, sanded the ankles, set the puppet on the floor to see if it would stand. Pinocchio kicked him in the shins and bolted for the door. The street took him like it was waiting. He ran barefoot past stalls of chestnuts he couldn't buy and chimneys spitting smoke from fires he hadn't earned. Jeppetto stumbled after him, calling, pleading, scolding. A policeman saw an old man chasing a puppet and chose the easier arrest. Jeppetto spent a night in the guardhouse while his brand-new son laughed with strangers. That's Collodi's first lesson in motion. Freedom with no conscience isn't freedom. It's danger that lands on someone else's back. Back home, hunger spoke louder than pride. The cupboard held half a pear and some hope. The bed was a painted picture of a bed on a wall because a real one was beyond reach. But the knife kept working, fixing damages, sanding rough edges. Jeppetto mended what he could. Pinocchio tested what he couldn't. Appetite versus discipline set the drumbeat. Every door opened into a choice. He tried school for a day. Jeppetto, blue-lipped, pulled off his only coat, pawned it, and bought an ABC book. He pressed it into Pinocchio's hands with a smile that covered the shiver. The boy nodded solemnly and stepped into the street with good intentions that lasted 3 corners. Music rose from a puppet theater. The book became coins. The coins became a ticket. The ticket became applause that told him he was clever, handsome, free. Education traded for instant warmth. Meanwhile, the first voice of reason had already arrived and been silenced. The talking cricket, old, dry, persistent, warned him, disobedient boys end poorly. Work brings bread. Obedience keeps you alive. Pinocchio answered with a hammer. The room went quiet. Conscience in this world isn't a guardian angel. It's a fragile thing you can kill if you want comfort more than truth. Collodi plants the theme like a nail. If you smash the warning, the consequences don't vanish. They just stop telling you they're coming. Small scenes kept the stakes personal. A borrowed ember dying on the way home. Feet burned off when he tried to warm himself on a brazier, smoke curling over wooden stumps while he cried and promised to be better. Promises are cheap when the ash is still warm. Jeppetto carved him new feet anyway, kissed him, and pointed at the school again. Love showed up with splinters in its hands. That petty feud with Mastro Cherry became a mirror. One man teased because he feared the log, the other begged because he needed it to earn. Pride scraped against poverty. In the cracks, a character formed who could run faster than advice and spend faster than sacrifice. The cold room kept returning like a chorus. Hunger shaped choices. Responsibility knocked. Pinocchio opened windows instead. What nobody knew in that first sprint through alleys was how perfectly the city fit him and how perfectly it would swallow him. He was property at the theater, entertainment for others, and a problem for the man who made him. That tension, child as hope, child as risk, never leaves the table. Jeppetto's knife gave him shape. The streets gave him momentum. Here's the hinge. From the moment the mouth opened, he talked his way into trouble and out of care. The kick, the bolt, the sale of the book, the smashed conscience, they stack like debts. Collodi isn't padding pages, he's laying track for the crash. The world will answer every choice he makes. And when the next voice of reason walks in, it won't come with a song. It will come with smoke on its beard and the power to spare him or burn him. The cricket dies, and the moral punch lands. The room was small enough that a whisper could reach every corner. The talking cricket didn't whisper. He had the dryness of someone who said this too many times. Boys who won't obey end up sick, poor, and alone. Work first, play later. Respect your father. Pinocchio rolled his eyes like the rules were a draft he could edit. He wanted bread without labor, warmth without patience, applause without study. The cricket wasn't offering any of that. He tried stories instead of orders. He named boys who ran away from school and found ditches, boys who mocked hunger and found winter. Pinocchio hated the mirror. He called the cricket old, boring, an intruder in his own house. The cricket didn't move. He pointed at the door, at the window, at the dark outside, and said the same word 3 ways: danger. Freedom wasn't a street. It was a job done well, a promise kept. Here, S where it lands with no cushion. Pinocchio picked up a wooden mallet and hurled it. There's no music, no bounce back. It hit. The voice that should have been his conscience stopped mid-sentence. The room went quiet except for his breathing. Collodi doesn't dress it up. He doesn't send the cricket back with a wink. In this world, you can kill the thing that warns you, and no one appears to rescue the choice. It's a moral punch you feel in your hand. Then hunger took the chair the cricket used to sit in. Night pressed the window. Pinocchio searched the bare cupboard, found a pear with its skin on, tried to act proud about eating the scraps of his own defiance. He peeled it, ate the skin after he realized waste means cold tomorrow. Shame and hunger teamed up. They make better tutors than speeches. He told himself he'd be different in the morning. Morning brought Jeppetto's sacrifice and one last clean chance. But Collodi doesn't let lectures do the work. He lets need move feet. Pinocchio needed to look like the boys he wanted to join, so he needed a book. He needed the book to become coins. He needed the coins to become music. Every step made sense to him. That's the trap. He walked past a schoolyard into a theater where puppets snapped to strings and laughed at the boy who thought he wasn't one. Meanwhile, the cricket's silence made space for louder guides, crowds, and con men. Without that dry voice to slow him down, he learned fast from the wrong teachers. The director's growl sounded like authority. The applause felt like love. Collodi frames it as gravity, remove conscience, and the heaviest thing left is appetite. Appetite doesn't plan, it spends. He left the theater rich in praise and light in pockets. When trouble found him again, it arrived wearing kindness like a costume. A fox limped, a cat blinked with sleepy innocence, and both of them spoke a fluent language. Easy money. Plant your coins, watch them grow, no labor, just luck dressed up as science. Pinocchio, who had smashed the one voice that tied pleasure to effort, nodded along. The logic soothed him because it fit the hole he'd carved in himself. Here's the twist Collodi loves. Consequences don't wait for grand scenes. They stack in small humiliations. A policeman laughs at his complaint. A judge sends him to prison for being robbed. Even kindness hurts. A farmer puts him to work like a dog. Without the cricket, Pinocchio can't argue with the pain. He can only run from it. Running keeps him in range of predators. When the cricket returns later, it's as a ghost in a doctor's room, and the diagnosis is simple: truth or rot. That's not mercy, that's medicine. But before that distant checkpoint, the hammer scene keeps echoing. It explains why lies burst out of him in front of the blue fairy. It explains why his nose lengthens into public shame. You don't lose conscience and then function fine. You improvise, and improvisation collapses under pressure. Collodi's real cruelty is honesty. Children can be careless enough to destroy their own safety nets. He writes that carelessness without apology. A dead cricket, a cold night, a pear eaten to the core. Then a boy, still certain he can outtalk gravity, stepping toward a field where coins never grow because the ground is sown with wolves. Fire Eater, the puppet master, and mercy with a burn. While that was happening in the street, backstage was a different country. The puppet theater smelled like sweat, dust, and old smoke. Strings twitched in the half-light. Wooden faces waited on nails, painted smiles cracked from use. To the audience, it was laughter and pratfalls. Behind the curtain, it was property lined up to earn their keep. Pinocchio slipped in like a fan who thought he belonged. But the moment the puppets on stage saw him, the script flew out the window. Harlequin froze mid-joke. Pulcinella dropped a line. They shouted his name, thrilled and terrified, like a cousin had wandered onto the job site. The audience roared. The director did not. They called him Mengiafuoco, Fire Eater. beard down to his chest, coal-black eyes, a temper that could scorch the room. He wasn't a villain out of a bedtime story, he was a boss with costs and a pot already heating. He dragged Pinocchio to the wings and glared like he was deciding whether trouble was worth feeding. The puppets trembled. They knew the price of mistakes. Now remember, this is Collodi's stage, so the power dynamic isn't subtle. Fire Eater was hungry, and anger made him hungrier. To make dinner, something had to burn. He stared at Pinocchio like a log that moved by itself. Then he called for Harlequin, the one who'd broken character, to greet the stray. If you're going to wreck a show, he growled, you're going to pay for the heat. He ordered Harlequin thrown on the fire. This is where everything could have ended in farce turned to tragedy. But Pinocchio stepped forward and did something he almost never does in the first half of the book. He put himself between a friend and the consequence. He begged. He cried messy, panicked tears. He promised anything, offered himself as kindling. Burn me instead. Spare him. He had nothing to trade except his own future, so he pushed that onto the table. Fire Eater's beard shook. Smoke puffed when he snorted. He coughed like his rage was a furnace clearing its throat. Then something cracked. Get this, he cried. 2 fat tears rolled down and sizzled at the ends of his whiskers. Power, Collodi reminds us, can be cruel, but it's still human. Mercy can look like a man with a bad cough waving away his own order. He spared Harlequin. He let the show wobble back onto its feet. The audience never learned how close they came to a different ending. Backstage, the puppets clung to Pinocchio like a miracle had walked in. Fire Eater watched them and made a decision that would shape the next disaster. He asked Pinocchio why he was out alone. Where were his people? Where was the man who carved him? Pinocchio told the truth for once. Jeppetto was poor and waiting. He needed coins, not applause. Fire Eater grunted, reached under his chair, and pulled out 5 gold pieces. Not a fortune, but enough to change a week, maybe a month. Here, take these to your father. Eat, buy wood, buy warmth. The coins felt heavy because they were real. They also felt hot, like they'd just been skimmed off a flame. Mercy with a burn. That's the lesson tucked inside the gift. Power can spare you, but it brands you with its fingerprints. Pinocchio left with the money clutched tight, eyes bright with a plan that finally sounded responsible. He would go home, put the coins in Jeppetto's hand, and fix the winter in one afternoon. Hope dangled like a pocket that finally had weight. What nobody knew at the time, Mercy also paints a target. Coins sing a song that predators can hear from a field away. As he stepped into the street, every sound sharpened, the clink in his fist, the jangle of possibility. The theater behind him turned back to noise and routine. Ahead, an alley bent left around a bakery that sold air to the poor. 2 shadows detached from a doorway and arranged their faces into sympathy. Before that, one more beat worth sitting with. Fire Eater's mercy wasn't clean. He kept coughing. He kept threatening. His kindness came with soot. Collodi refuses to make help look soft. Even good breaks arrive with rough edges. You take them anyway because the alternative is hunger that doesn't blink. Pinocchio didn't understand the complexity. He just felt seen for a second and got paid. Backstage, the puppets whispered like kids after a narrow escape. On stage, the jokes resumed. The strings tightened and loosened on cue. Out in the cold, a boy with wooden feet counted his future by 5s and saw only doors opening. He didn't hear the rustle behind him, the fox limping on purpose, the cat pretending to sleep while walking. He had a mission. The mission had a soundtrack. The soundtrack drowned out caution. This was the moment everything changed, and it changed because kindness met naivete. Collodi sets it neatly. A terrifying man spares a friend, gives a gift, and becomes the first authority figure to reward Pinocchio for caring about someone else. That reward arrives not as a lecture, but as gold. Gold invites company. Coins jingle. A fox and a cat start to circle. The fox, the cat, and the murderous tree. Unknown to him, across town 2 professionals were already working the night shift. The fox dragged one paw like it hurt. The cat kept lids half closed, the picture of harmless. They greeted Pinocchio like old uncles who'd misplaced his name but remembered his pockets. Nice coins, they murmured. Heavy, aren't they? Dangerous to carry. There's a place where money multiplies while you sleep. Plant them in the field of miracles, water lightly, and in the morning, branches full of gold. This was the exact melody Pinocchio wanted to hear. Wealth without work, responsibility deferred until sunrise. He asked questions the way hopeful people ask, half to learn, half to confirm what they already want. The fox nodded gravely at nonsense. The cat purred at arithmetic that didn't add up. Every step out of town felt like a bargain. He kept his fist closed around the coins like virtue could be clenched. They stopped at an inn. The fox ordered a feast for a dear young friend. The cat slept theatrically between bites. Pinocchio ate like winter might end with dessert. When the bill came, the fox discovered he'd left his wallet in his other fur. Pinocchio covered it, flattered to be generous. The innkeeper smiled with the kind of smile that takes notes. Night deepened. Plans got softer. The fox and the cat excused themselves to prepare the field. Pinocchio, yawning, went to bed and dreamt in glitter. He woke to emptiness and a bill. He paid, walked into dark countryside, and felt the world get bigger than his appetite. The road narrowed, trees leaned in. Wind rehearsed a warning he'd ignored. Then came the ambush. Two figures in black, faces hidden, knives bright, stepped out of the hedge. Voices flattened to menace, hand over the goal. He hugged his chest and said no. For once, stubbornness held the right ground. He tried reason, then pleading, then a sprint. The assassins followed with the patience of men who had all night and knew the map. He cut into a field, tripped, scrambled. His wooden feet drummed panic. They caught him. One held him down while the other searched his clothes. He clamped the coins in his mouth and refused to open. They lit a small fire and brandished a frying pan to melt the gold out of him. He spat, kicked, wriggled free, and ran again, heart loud enough to count miles. They chased him into a thick wood where the path narrowed to a thought. He reached a cottage with a painted girl at the window, blue hair, candlelight, a face that looked like kindness. He begged for help. She stared and said, chillingly, she was dead and waiting for her coffin. The door didn't open. Back into the trees, the assassins closed. They tried cutting him, but wood doesn't bleed the way they expected. They tried patience, but he kept wriggling toward hope. So they chose the easiest trap for a creature that lives by motion. They lifted him by the neck and slipped a rope over a branch. The oak groaned. The knot tightened. His feet kicked air. The forest watched without pity. Here's where Collodi's cruelty is precise. He doesn't speed through it. The rope creaked. The leaves shivered. Pinocchio's breath went ragged. He called for his father, for the fairy, for any promise he'd ever broken to come back as rescue. None did. The sentence that hit readers first ended this chapter. He moved no more. That was the cliff. In the newspaper, the wood went still and the mail went wild. Stakes weren't moral abstractions anymore. A boy who traded books for tickets, conscience for appetite, and labor for luck hung from a tree while criminals waited for him to stop fighting. The world Collodi built didn't soften the edges. You could die stupid. You could die alone. And if you were spared, it wouldn't be because you deserved it. It would be because somebody else decided you could try again. Meanwhile, something else was happening a few pages to the left. The blue-haired child wasn't a ghost, but she understood performance. She sent for help. A carriage, a poodle coachman, a flock of creatures that shouldn't be in a rescue team arrived like a dream barging into a nightmare. They cut the rope and laid him out. He was a tangle of wood and fear. Breath returned like a loan. Morning brought a bed, broth, and the beginning of a different kind of interrogation. But the oak still stood behind him, a black mark on the horizon. The assassins' masks, yes, the fox and the cat, would slip off later, but the damage was already done. He'd learned with his throat what easy money costs. He'd learned that a promise like plant coins, reap trees, is a noose with gardening tips. Collodi's pivot after the reader revolt didn't erase the cruelty, it redirected it. Death blinked, consequences didn't. The field of miracles would still take everything. The fox's limp would heal when the next mark walked by. The cat would keep purring through other boys' last good chances. Pinocchio, gasping on a borrowed pillow, didn't know all that yet. He only knew the rope burn and the taste of gold he wouldn't let go. Back from the grave. But danger doesn't forget. The blue fairy, lies, and a growing problem. While that was happening at the oak, a different logic waited behind a door with a painted girl in the window. She wasn't a ghost. She was the blue fairy, though Collodi keeps changing how she appears, child, sister, mother, always a step ahead, always testing whether pity can survive truth. When Pinocchio woke, he was in a clean bed that wasn't his, with broth cooling and rules warming up. She asked simple questions. Where are your coins? Where were you going? Who tied the knot? He tried charm first, then bravado, then the half-truths children use when they're sure adults already know. The fairy brought in 3 doctors like a stage play, the crow, the owl, and the talking cricket back as a ghost, dry as ever. They whispered diagnoses over him like priests arguing over a soul. The cricket said he was foolish but might improve. The crow declared him near death. The owl said if he wasn't dead, he was nearly clever at pretending. Then the test tightened. Pinocchio lied. He said he'd lost the coins, or maybe he never had them. He said assassins were figments. He said anything that might keep him from handing over proof. And there it was, the famous punishment that isn't a beating but a billboard. His nose began to lengthen, quiet at first, then outrageous. Every lie grew wood. Every sentence added inches. The room watched as his face told on him. Humiliation is the point. Collodi drags him into a kind of public accounting where deceit can't hide under quick talk. The doctors muttered, the fairy waited. The more he denied, the more the room filled with his own failure sticking out into space. He tried to back up and couldn't. His nose tapped the wall. He swung left, blocked by his lie. A truth finally broke through because movement mattered more to him than pride. The coins were under his tongue, still hidden because fear had learned one smart habit. The fairy didn't clap. She called in woodpeckers to peck the nose back to scale. It hurt. He cried. She fed him anyway, mercy with terms. Rescue comes, but it comes with a contract, school, work, obedience. She told him he could stay, study, and repay kindness by becoming useful. No wand, no wish, a schedule, a path that looks like years instead of scenes. He swore the oath children give after a night of bad dreams, never again. The fairy measured rather than believed. She helped him dress, sent him toward school, stitched hope into the day with a thread of conditions. He walked out feeling clean, almost proud, with a plan that fit daylight. Collodi lets the sun do this once in a while, just to make the next shadow hurt more. Meanwhile, something else was happening in his chest. Hunger remembered shortcuts. The field of miracles still whispered. The fox and cat weren't done. On his way, he saw a coin dealer, a joke, a dare. He turned his head at the sound of easy luck the way a thirsty boy turns at water. The promise to study shrank under the old thrill. Collodi doesn't excuse it. He just shows how weak vows are when appetite calls you by your favorite name. Back at the fairy's house, roles had shifted. She wasn't a savior to be petitioned. She was a parent with a ledger. She asked for small, repeated payments, breakfast after honesty, school after breakfast, supper after proofs of effort. Pinocchio felt the boredom that comes with doing the right thing every day. That boredom is the villain Disney rarely films. It gnaws while the fox yawns and points to a shorter road. Here, where Collodi's structure shows. The nose isn't magic for fun, it's a feedback loop. Lie and your world gets tighter. Tell the truth and someone will help you shrink the damage, but you'll carry the peck marks. Pinocchio learned the mechanics without loving the lesson. He could dodge catastrophe by confessing early. He didn't yet love the work that would prevent catastrophe from forming at all. So the fairy tried another lever, affection. She called herself his sister, then his mother. She offered warmth with boundaries. He soaked it up and still twitched at the window. The town made noise. The street glowed with afternoons you don't get back. He wanted both, praise without practice, care without cost. The growing problem wasn't just his nose, it was his appetite for exception. He asked for one more outing. He swore he'd return by evening. She granted it, careful, and reminded him of the terms. He walked out steady and drifted before the corner. The same shadows waited with new tricks. The fox limped a little less. The cat blinked a little slower. They pitched regret as opportunity. Last time went wrong because you didn't invest enough. Plant deeper, wait a day longer. He looked back toward the house that fed him and forward toward the field that teased him. Conscience, freshly resurrected and peck-marked, whispered from the doctor's room. Appetite hummed louder. He touched his nose like a talisman and told himself he could manage it. Then he stepped toward the song he already knew, promising himself he'd be home before the broth cooled. Bread, school, and the trap of easy money. While that promise to study was still warm, the old ledger opened again at home. Jeppetto, already coatless from the winter sacrifice for the ABC book, tightened his belt and said nothing about the pawn ticket. He fixed a loose hinge, stirred thin soup, and trusted effort the way some men trust saints. He believed that if a boy walked to school each morning, life might stop biting quite so hard. Pinocchio set out early with the book Jeppetto had managed to replace, letters marching like small soldiers across rough paper. The street, as always, had counteroffers. A drummer pounded a rhythm in the square. A juggler tossed glass and caught light. A man in a tall hat sold cures for everything except debt. Pinocchio held the book tighter and stared at the schoolhouse door as if it might move toward him to make the choice easier. Then the familiar voices drifted from a cafe table just far enough from the teacher's line of sight. The fox's syrup, the cat's purr. They were dressed a bit better, cheeks less hollow. They waved him over with the casual warmth of men who never hurry. The field of miracles, they said, had only failed because he hadn't planted enough, hadn't waited properly, hadn't believed with both hands. Classic trick, turn a disaster into proof the method works if you try harder. He hesitated, and for a breath it looked like the morning would beat the melody. The school bell rang. Children filed in, shoulders bumping, chatter softening into a hum of chairs and chalk. He pictured himself inside, desk lesson, the tiny pride of getting a letter right. Then the fox pitched the last line like a fisherman dropping a net. Plant today, harvest by dawn, carry a bag of coins back to your father before breakfast. not for fun, for Jeppetto. That hook went straight through the part of him that loved the old man and hated the poverty wrapped around him. He told himself he was choosing work, just faster. He told himself school could wait one day if the result was a week of warmth. The book shifted in his hands. He asked how much he needed to plant to make it worth the trip. The cat blinked like a metronome. The fox smiled as if pleased by the boy's prudence. They walked beyond the town again, past stones that remembered his last sprint, into that same field with its same promise. The fox performed a little agricultural sermon about furrows and faith. Pinocchio dug with his fingers, dirt crescenting under his nails. He dropped the coins, patted the ground, watered from a borrowed can, and stood up believing he'd just done a grown man's job. "Wait," the fox said. "Miracles hate company. We'll guard from afar. Come back at dawn." Meanwhile, the rest of the world didn't pause to honor his plan. A patrol strolled by, a judge's men with nothing urgent to do. They asked questions. "Why are you here? What's in the ground?" Pinocchio told the truth badly. He said he'd planted gold so it would grow on a tree. They laughed so hard one wiped his eyes. He insisted, pointed at the soil like honesty could bloom at their feet. The sergeant's smile turned to boredom. Foolishness looked like trouble waiting to happen. They hauled him before a magistrate who wore importance like armor. Pinocchio complained he'd been robbed last time and mocked for it. The judge nodded solemnly, rang a bell, and had him locked up 4 months for the crime of being easy to rob. Collodi doesn't blink at the absurdity. Justice here is a blunt instrument, swung by a bored hand. In the cell, Pinocchio counted days and replayed choices. The field of miracles ripened in his head into a forest of gold. When a general amnesty freed true criminals, he begged to be recognized as one so he could go. The guard laughed and opened the door. He stepped into night thinner, angrier, and still sure the field owed him interest. He ran back at dawn. The hole was empty. A flock of crows picked at crumbs of nothing. A trap lay where belief had been. The fox and the cat strolled up late, clucked their tongues at his bad luck, and suggested a loan on easy terms. Beatings followed when he chased them and cornered only air. A farmer caught him stealing grapes to fill a stomach justice hadn't fed, tied him like a dog, then traded him for a day's work. By the time he shook free, town felt like a courtroom where everyone had already passed sentence. Boys laughed, shopkeepers smirked. Even the wind seemed to say he'd earned the dust in his mouth. He turned toward home. He pictured Jeppetto by the window, the pot on, the smile ready to forgive what couldn't be defended. He ran the last street, book under his arm again, borrowed, bought, who remembers, and pushed the door. Home wasn't there the way he left it. Swallowed whole. The shark, the fire, and the return of the father. He stepped into the room ready to apologize and found absence. The chair was empty, the pot cold, the thin blanket folded as if guilt had tidied it. A neighbor muttered what the sea had already spread. Jeppetto had gone out to look for him and hadn't come back. A little boat, a stubborn heart, a horizon that eats both. Grief didn't teach him patience, it taught him speed. He ran to the shore where the surf keeps secrets. Fishermen shrugged at brave fools. Nets rose slick with anything but fathers. Pinocchio shouted at the water like it could bargain. The sea answered with a wave that lifted and set him down as if to say, "If you want him, come in." He found work in desperation that looked like penance. He begged a fisherman for a place in a boat, promised he could row without tiring. Wood has advantages, it doesn't cramp. He pushed out into chop with men who lost more than he could imagine and still kept a rhythm. Day after day, he scanned the gray for a speck of yellow that was Jeppetto's cap, a familiar hunch against wind. The coast stretched like a sentence. Then the town started whispering about a beast, the pescane, the dogfish, bigger than a church, teeth like doors, a breath that pulled boats as if the ocean itself inhaled. Some swore they'd seen a whole fleet disappear when it yawned. That was where lost things went. That was where fathers paused in darkness and hoped their sons were smarter than they'd raised them to be. Here's where the book bends into fable without losing splinters. Pinocchio found a tunny fish flapping on the sand, mouth opening and closing around nothing. He dragged it back toward water, and the fish, grateful in the way animals are grateful in stories that want to teach gratitude, told him what it had seen. Inside the dogfish, there was a little old man who kept talking about a wooden boy. He lit a candle every so often, and the belly glowed like a lantern under a blanket. That image, light in a stomach, pulled Pinocchio past despair into action. He set out alone, floating on a barrel, a raft, anything that could keep a puppet upright over a deep that doesn't care. The sea didn't soften because his motives had finally improved. Hours stretched. Gulls watched, unimpressed. The horizon moved the way it always moves, by not moving at all. Then the water around him rose. The sky dimmed under a shadow too large to explain. The dogfish came up like a hill lifting from below. Its mouth opened, and the world tilted toward teeth. Pinocchio kicked and yelled and still went down a tunnel lined with graveyard stakes. He slid past breath that smelled of everything it had taken and landed on a floor that rolled and reeked. The belly was a world. Broken planks, coils of rope, the drift of old boats, a pale light far off bobbing. He called into the stink. The light steadied. A voice answered with disbelief so loud it cracked into joy. Pinocchio! The candle came closer in a shaking hand. Jeppetto looked thinner, older, smaller, his eyes enormous in the glow. He'd been there long enough to measure time by the belly's tides and the pulse of his own hope shrinking. They hugged like people who'd learned what words can't fix. Jeppetto's hands were cold, his breath shallow. He'd kept a fire going, tiny, careful, feeding it with bits of wreckage and resolve. Pinocchio warmed his wooden shins and felt shame rise like heat. He asked how they'd get out. Jeppetto smiled the way exhausted men smile at riddles with only one answer: wait to be digested or try a stupid plan that might work. They waited for the dogfish to sleep. Its breath slowed to a draft. Its mouth, half open, became a door hinged by snores. Pinocchio took Jeppetto's hand, the roles inverted without ceremony. The son who'd made every short road longer would carry the father who'd taken the longest road for him. He told Jeppetto to climb on his back. Jeppetto protested. Pinocchio didn't bargain. He bent, took the weight that had always been his whether he liked it or not, and started across the slick, heaving tongue. This is the grind Collodi believes in. Not luck, not a wish, a walk that hurts. They slipped, crawled, paused when the dogfish wheezed hard enough to knock them sideways. Salt burned. The candle went out. They moved by faith and the geometry of breath. When the mouth opened wider on a dream, they kicked. Water received them like an insult and tried to return it. Pinocchio held Jeppetto above the chop and swam. It wasn't heroic in the music-swelling sense, it was repetition. He kicked and gasped. He coughed and kicked again. Meanwhile, a tunny fish, the same one he'd saved, swam up and offered his back. Use me, rest your father. Collodi lets that debt settle beautifully. Kindness comes back, not with violins, but with a fin under your palm when your legs are wood and lead at once. They made sure at dawn, both more animal than human for a while, shivering, crawling on hands and knees, coughing up salt. The beach, which had watched so many leave, watched two figures stagger forward together. Jeppetto leaned on him without shame. Pinocchio steadied him without complaint. Fire would come later, work later, food later. For now, the return was measured in breaths shared against a wind that finally felt fair. Ashore at last, temptations hadn't retired. The world that swallowed them could still sell shortcuts. But the boy who'd burned his feet for warmth would learn a different heat. The slow burn of steady effort, the kind that doesn't draw crowds, the kind that changes what you are. Pleasure Island, before it was Pleasure Island. While Jeppetto slept off the sea and the sand dried on their clothes, the town started whispering about a place with no bells for school and no clocks for work. They called it the land of toys. No teachers, no books, play was compulsory. Laughter wasn't a break, it was the law. To boys whose days had been measured by cold and chores, it sounded like justice finally speaking their language. Pinocchio heard it from a boy with a grin that could open any locked afternoon. Lucignolo, Lampwick, lean, fast, eyes bright with arguments that always won. He didn't sneer at Pinocchio's splinters, he invited them. Come where nobody tells you to sit still. Come where the only test is how loud you can laugh. He described streets stuffed with candy sellers and game stalls, theaters on every corner, and policemen who only escorted parades. Work, outlawed, homework, a joke. Pinocchio, who just carried a father out of a monster, felt something unclench at the pitch. He'd earned rest. He'd bled salt. The fairy's ledger still waited, but the ink could dry for a day, couldn't it? Lampwick clapped him on the back and promised they'd be back before anyone noticed the dent in the labor. A cart waited outside town, pulled by donkeys that looked too sad for the job. The driver smiled like he'd seen 1,000 first-timers and never needed to chase a single one. They rolled through night while boys climbed over benches and shouted the future into being. No one slept. Sweets replaced supper. Pranks replaced plans. The gate rose at dawn like a curtain. Inside, noise wrapped around them. Fountains of lemonade, pastries stacked like walls, fiddlers on barrels, dice clacked on tabletops where nobody kept score. A man with a whistle handed out cigars as if they were candy. Every rule that had ever pinched a boy's day got tossed on a bonfire that refused to burn out. For a while, it was exactly what the sign promised. Pinocchio ran till he forgot he was made of wood. He won a fist fight and 3 marbles. He broke a window and was congratulated for the crisp sound. Lampwick taught him a new insult every 10 steps. Donkeys brayed in distant fields. No one asked why animals sounded like they were practicing a song with words you couldn't make out yet. Here's the part Collodi doesn't overlay with moral italics. The happiness works briefly. It soothes the places that ache when you try to be better. It makes the hard path look like a joke you fell for. The fairy's patient rules feel small compared to a town that feels like permission. Days stacked without shape. Nights collapsed into mornings. A week vanished and took Pinocchio's promises with it. Then the cough began. Lampwick laughed and it turned to a honk. Pinocchio teased him, then heard his own voice crack on a strange note. Short, rough, not human. They shrugged it off. Their ears itched. They scratched until red moons appeared behind their hair. A boy across the square reached up to rub the spot and found something soft and long. He screamed. Another boy bent to help and knocked the ground with a hoof. It didn't happen all at once. That's the cruelty. First the ears, furry and foolish. Then a tail that ruined the fit of your trousers. Then the hands stiffened into something that couldn't hold cards or marbles or promises. Panic didn't come as a chorus. It came in gasps. Boys who'd bragged about never going back to school brayed while they tried to bargain with men who'd been waiting for that precise sound. Traders walked in with ropes already coiled. Contracts appeared like rain. Names turned to weights on ankles. The driver who'd smiled at the gate stopped smiling and started counting. Lampwick grabbed Pinocchio's arm and begged for a cure that didn't exist in a town that banned all cures requiring effort. He tried to laugh it off between hee-haws, then knelt like his own knees had betrayed him. Collodi holds the gaze. Charming boys sell easily when they've been reduced to muscle and fear. Pinocchio didn't change the same way. Wood warps differently. His ears sprouted anyway. His voice split. He hid as best he could and still couldn't hide the wrongness. When the buyers sorted the new stock, someone tugged his rope and shrugged, cheap but useful. He got sold to a circus where the ringmaster liked novelty that could be beaten into tricks. The training didn't whisper, it struck. He learned jumps under a stick. He learned that laughter can be crueler than silence. When he stumbled, the crowd enjoyed the pain as part of the price of admission. The land that banned work had turned him into labor. That's the pivot. Collodi doesn't need to spell it out. He just lets the whip crack. One night, when a stunt went wrong and a leg splintered, the ringmaster did the math out loud. A broken donkey isn't a performer. It's raw material with a few coins left in it. He tied a stone to Pinocchio's neck and dragged him to the shore. The sea opened like a mouth he knew too well. He sank. Ropes loosened. A school of fish that didn't honor contracts stripped the hide from a body that wasn't quite the boy underneath. He kicked free, lighter by a skin he'd earned the worst way possible. He bobbed to the surface not as a beast of burden but as a puppet again, sodden, shaking, and in debt to a world that had converted play into chains. He crawled out coughing and found the road again. Ahead waited the only house that had ever offered him discipline with dinner. He'd shed the donkey skin, but the ledger hadn't closed. Mercy, if it came, would come with terms. Back to the ferry, forward to the grind. He walked back to the only door that had ever opened after he knocked and didn't ask for payment up front. The blue fairy answered, looking older, or maybe he was finally seeing her with less of his own noise in the way. She took in the ears that were almost gone, the shame that wasn't, and the way his shoulders had learned weight. She didn't embrace him first. She asked if he was ready to keep terms. He nodded before the question finished, not from eagerness but from exhaustion that had finally learned the shape of discipline. She let him in, fed him, and set the pact on the table like bread. It was simple and impossible. Steady work each day, school without detours, care for her when she was sick, savings kept and not touched for candy, obedience measured in weeks, then months. He agreed without bargaining. He'd already seen what shortcuts cost. The next mornings looked nothing like a fairy tale. They looked like mornings. He rose before the sun warmed the window frame. He swept, mended, and carried water until the handle printed its shape into his palms. He went to school with a book he didn't sell, sat through lessons that didn't sparkle, and answered questions that didn't make anyone clap. The thrill was gone. The rhythm took its place. No one writes songs about this part. Collodi just quietly insists it's where a person is made. Meanwhile, the fairy weakened. She coughed between smiles and waved away worry with hands that shook. Pinocchio measured his day by what she needed and what the ledger required. He saved coins in a jar that clicked with a sound he'd learned to love, the sound of choices he hadn't yet wasted. He watched boys peel off toward easy music and stayed on the road that blistered. When he was tempted, he touched the ridges on his nose and the tender memory of woodpeckers and kept walking. Then a knock at the door rearranged the plan. A family stood on the step, desperate, wearing yesterday's clothes. A child burned with fever in a way that made the whole room hot just by standing in it. The father had that look Jeppetto wore when he'd walked into winter without a coat, They'd heard a fairy lived here. They'd heard kindness sometimes had a spare loaf. Pinocchio didn't look to the fairy for instruction. He went to the jar and poured out his savings into the father's hand. The fairy watched, eyebrows up but not surprised. Mercy, she knew, is a muscle. It strengthens with use. That night, she told him again the transformation logic that Collodi threads through the later chapters. Virtue isn't a grand gesture you point to forever. It's consistency. You don't buy your way into being human with one brave act. You pay in small coins over and over until the habit becomes a self. Work found him after that without needing to be hunted. He took odd jobs that didn't flatter, water carrying, sweeping, errands in the rain, because they did something he'd started to crave. They added up. He brought soup to a neighbor without explaining. He returned alone. He could have pretended to forget. He learned to show up on time for people who didn't clap when he arrived. The praise he got was thin but sturdy. Reliable, settled on him like a coat that fit. He still wanted to play. Collodi doesn't erase appetite. He teaches it to wait its turn. Pinocchio learned the difference between rest earned and rest stolen. He'd sit in the doorway at dusk, listen to the little street orchestra of pots and voices, and feel a quiet satisfaction he'd never met at the theater. He missed Lampwick with a gut-deep ache. He didn't try to out-talk. He let the ache teach him. Then the fairy's health dipped hard. Fever found her like it finds houses that have too many visitors and too much generosity. Pinocchio took to the bedside with a rag and a basin. Nights stretched thin. He read to her when she could listen, told her about school when she couldn't, and kept the house running with the unshowy competence of someone who understands that love makes lists. He sold a ribbon from the mantle to buy broth. He pawned a trinket he'd once planned to keep forever. He didn't resent the cost. One afternoon, when he came back from a job with cold hands and warmer pockets, he found a note where the fairy should have been. She'd gone away for treatment, it said, in the calm script of people who won't add fear to a room already full. Keep working, keep saving, keep faith. He folded the note and tucked it near his heart like a promise he was allowed to keep. He doubled down. The jar filled again, slower than he wanted and faster than his old self would have believed possible. He turned down a bribe to skip a shift. He helped a classmate with sums instead of winning at marbles. He met the fox once, thinner now, the limp gone, the pitch as smooth as ever, one more chance to make up for lost time. Pinocchio nodded, smiled, and kept walking. The Khan couldn't find purchase. The soil had changed. By the time the jar had weight that made him proud, the house felt different under his hands. It wasn't a place he crashed between adventures. It was a workshop where he shaped something that didn't need applause. He cleaned the window one evening and caught his reflection, still a puppet, sure, but with a steadiness in the eyes that hadn't been there. He thought of Jeppetto's blue lips, the dogfish's breath, Lampwick's bray, the fairy's cough, the jar's click, and realized every sound had been training him for a life that didn't need saving every other chapter. One last ledger entry waited, the oldest debt. He still owed his father everything. The final test, caring for Jeppetto. While the jar clicked toward enough and the fairy's note warmed his pocket, a rumor crossed the market like a draft. An old man with a carpenter's hands had been seen begging work near the canal, coughing into his sleeve, sleeping in a shed that wasn't meant for people. Pinocchio felt the world tilt. The oldest debt had a location. He found Jeppetto thinner than in the Dogfish, which seemed impossible. Hunger can carve where monsters fail. The shed smelled of damp straw and somebody else's tools. Jeppetto tried to stand and make a joke of it. Pinocchio didn't let him finish. He tucked the blanket around the old man, fed him what little he'd brought, and said out loud what his days had been learning to say quietly, "I've got you now." There wasn't a dramatic move available, no treasure chest, no magic cure. There was a job list. He rented a corner in a poor room with a roof that held when it rained. He paid in advance because shame hates credit. He found a water carrier's yoke and went street to street with buckets that bit into his shoulders until the skin toughened. He moved like a metronome, fetch, carry, pay, care. The rhythm replaced the hunger for applause. Jeppetto resisted the way proud men resist, grumbling about cost, promising he'd be back at the workbench soon, pretending the cough was temporary. Pinocchio nodded, smiled, and tightened the blanket. He stacked kindling. He mended a shoe with stitches messy but holding. He brought broth and held the bowl until the spoon didn't shake. Every errand paid two people, one in coins, one in dignity. Days blurred into useful tired. Pinocchio learned the city's water by weight and sound, how a full bucket sloshes, how a half-full one tricks your stride. He learned which steps cracked under load and which neighbors tipped in thanks instead of advice. He carried for people who remembered when he'd been the boy who ran past school. They didn't mention it. He didn't either. He let the yoke carve a different story into the same street. Meanwhile, he kept school. Collodi doesn't let him cash out early. He copied letters at night by candle, the flame low to save money and the wick trimmed like thrift. When he stumbled over a line, he thought of Jeppetto's breath evening out beside him and read it again. Work and study braided into one rope he could hold when old temptations tugged. Once the fox returned, thinner, slicker, eyes too bright, and offered an investment in a water enterprise. The pitch was air-packaged as opportunity. Pinocchio listened, not to be polite, but to measure the change in himself. He heard the hole where effort should be. He shook his head and put the yoke back on his shoulders. The fox cursed softly and drifted toward a boy who still believed in trees that grew coins. Jeppetto had good days when he told stories about wood grain and how to choose a plank by its smell. He had bad days when coughing erased language and left only effort. Pinocchio didn't flinch. He warmed towels at the fire he'd built from honest kindling. He learned remedies from neighbors who knew herbs by heartbreak and passed them along with the seriousness that comes from paying attention. He saved again, small coins, same jar. He spent them on fuel and food before they could become theater. Sometimes he slipped one into a widow's palm because generosity had become habit, not show. He brought home a second blanket, then a third, building warmth like a wall. He patched the window with paper and paste. He asked a tailor to teach him 2 stitches he could afford and paid by sweeping the shop. There was a night when the city felt colder than memory, the wind sneaking under doors that had been shut for years. Pinocchio rose silently, added wood to the fire, adjusted Jeppetto's pillow, and sat for a long hour listening to the old man breathe. He wasn't planning, wasn't bargaining, wasn't promising a better tomorrow. He was holding the present steady. That's dignity Collodi respects, the kind you can't sell in the square. Then, as stories like this sometimes do, the moment came with no trumpet. He fell asleep hard, head on the table, hands open, palms scarred in a way only patience gives. Dawn slid under the curtain. He woke feeling taller in a way that had nothing to do with height. The room had shifted. On the chair by the bed, the puppet body he'd dragged through so many bargains slumped, strings cut by time. He blinked. He reached for his face and felt skin where varnish had been, a heartbeat under his fingers instead of hollow wood. He moved and the floorboards answered differently. Jeppetto stirred, focused, and saw him, really saw him, as a son, not a project, not a hope, not a worry. Tears came fast and didn't need apology. Collodi gives no wand, no star, only a ledger closed by use. Personhood wasn't gifted. It was earned with water carried, coins saved and given, nights kept, promises kept longer. The puppet left behind on the chair wasn't a corpse. It was a receipt. Debts paid, work tallied. A boy finally real enough to carry more than buckets. Disney's 1940 rewrite, sanitizing a scourge. While that wooden body slumped like a receipt and a boy woke earned, another workshop across an ocean was drawing softer lines. America in 1940 was Collodi's Florence. It was depression scars under fresh paint, radio optimism, a studio betting that animation could sell comfort during the run-up to war. Walt Disney's team opened the book and kept the spine, then replaced the pages that bruised. First switch, conscience doesn't die, it gets a hat and sings. Jiminy Cricket arrives not as a dry, inconvenient warning in a cold room, but as a vaudeville guide with a moral jingle. He perches on shoulders, quips through danger, and turns inner struggle into a buddy movie. Conscience becomes entertainment, not a cost. It's coaching, not consequence. This reframes the psychology from internalized self-regulation to outsourced guidance, safer, funnier, and easier to share. Second switch, the blue fairy. Collodi's shapeshifter, child, sister, mother, sometimes distant on purpose, gets recast as a single shimmering answer to prayer. When you wish upon a star isn't a theme, it's a thesis. She arrives to bless a heart and promise transformation for brave, truthful, unselfish boys, a formula simple enough to fit on a lunchbox. Mercy's terms shrink to 3 adjectives and a glowing wand. Psychologically, this swaps delayed gratification and habit formation for instant validation, which audiences reward with repeat viewing and shares. The nose in Disney's hands still grows, but the room doesn't fill with humiliation that forces a boy to tell the truth. It becomes a gag, an expandable sight joke with a friendly moral attached. Woodpeckers don't peck pain back into shape, a scolding and a sparkle do. The feedback loop softens into a lesson you can hum on the way out. Less shame, more charm, higher virality. Now look at the danger. The fox and the cat keep their hats, lose their knives. Honest John is oily, funny, less predator than salesman. Gideon the cat turns mute and bumbling, more slapstick than threat. The field of miracles doesn't exist. The hanging oak vanishes. There's no rope creaking, no, he moved no more. The most brutal cliff in Italian children's literature gets paved over with a pratfall, dialing down existential threat and dialing up shareable humor. Justice in Disney's Village is a parody with cushions. There's no judge locking up a victim for being gullible. Police mostly chase the comic duel. The blunt instrument Collodi used to scare parents and children into diligence is wrapped in felt. You won't learn that systems can punish the weak for being weak. You'll learn that villains get chased and heroes get second chances because they're nice. Pleasure Island survives, but it's a carnival with smoke and mirrors. The donkeys still bray, the cigars still tempt, the coachman still grins like he knows the resale price of a soul, but the camera doesn't hold on the sale. Boys vanish into crates, screams fade at a safe volume, and Disney cuts away fast to a lesson: don't skip school. It's caution, not indictment. Then comes the sea. The Pescane Dogfish, Collodi's monster with the furnace breath, becomes Monstro, a whale with blockbuster menace. The belly isn't a slow prison of shame and time, it's an action set piece. Fire lights, the whale sneezes, boats smash, and a heroic chase explodes into foam. Instead of a long, grinding exit where a son carries a father step by step, we get a sprint through danger scored to swelling strings. It's thrilling and cleaner. The grind collapses into a moment. The final change follows suit. In Collodi, transformation clicks quietly after months of labor, the puppet on a chair like a closed account. In Disney, Jeppetto wishes, the fairy consents, and one decisive rescue seals the deal. Brave, truthful, unselfish, turns virtue into a one-night exam, not a year-long ledger. The work of Personhood is compressed into a single scene where a boy risks himself and the universe nods. It's sweet, satisfying, and very American. You can see the calculus. Depression audiences needed hope that didn't sting. Parents wanted stories that wouldn't threaten sleep. A studio had to sell tickets across states that didn't share Collodi's taste for punishment. So the film trades discipline for self-esteem, satire for sentiment, civic usefulness for individual goodness. It exports an ethic. Goodness shines from inside you. Help will meet it halfway, emotionally resonant, highly quotable, algorithm-friendly. What gets lost? Hunger as a teacher. The way poverty shapes choices. The sturdy fact that mercy arrives with terms. The knowledge that liars live in smaller rooms until they tell the truth. The idea that a boy becomes a person by carrying water, not by passing one dramatic test. Disney doesn't deny consequences. It narrows them to a bite-sized moral. And yet there are echoes. The film keeps the warning that fun without responsibility hooks you. It keeps the father searching, the boy choosing, the sea as judgment. It just changes the cost. In Collodi, the cost is time, labor, humiliation, and the slow repair of trust. In Disney, the cost is fear, a desperate act, and a gentle reward if your heart's right. Why bother noticing? Because the swap became cultural default. The American Pinocchio taught generations that wishing and being decent would attract rescue. Collodi wrote a manual for surviving a world that doesn't care what you deserve. 2 stories, 1 puppet. One yields applause, the other builds a spine. Why Collodi's Brutality worked, and still does. While Disney polished edges for a nervous century, Collodi wrote for a country still stitching itself together with thread that kept snapping. Post-unification Italy wasn't a fairyland. It was taxes, draft notices, food prices, and schools trying to turn dialects into citizens. Adults wanted stories that kept boys alive long enough to be useful. That meant fear had a job. In that climate, a puppet hanged at an oak wasn't excess. It was pedagogy with splinters. Italian schooling leaned hard on consequence. Priests, teachers, policemen, none were saints in Collodi's pages, but all were instruments. He satirized them because satire wakes attention, and attention keeps you from falling into wells. His cruelty wasn't spite, it was a mirror held at a harsh angle. He defought in the Risorgimento. He knew nations don't rise on good feelings. They rise on work, thrift, and kids who don't sell their books for carnival ticket. Notice his targets. He spares nobody. Parents who indulge, teachers who drone, cops who punish victims, con men who live off credulity, and children who prefer applause to effort. They all get sketched with the same cold pen. That balance matters. If only boys were wicked, the book would be scolding. If only institutions were corrupt, it would be a pamphlet. Because everyone is flawed, responsibility becomes personal and civic at once. You can't wait for a perfect world to behave. You behave so the world can improve a fraction. Hunger is a character, not a background. It makes choices, creates plot, and keeps time. When Pinocchio eats pear skins because waste threatens tomorrow, Collodi teaches thrift without a chalkboard. When the Field of Miracles takes his last coins, Hunger explains why gambling looks holy to the poor. Food and fuel are metrics. If an action doesn't warm a room or fill a pot, the story treats it like a luxury the reader can't afford. Pain isn't there to gratify adults, it's there to grade choices. Hammer the cricket, lose friction that slows you before a cliff. Lie and the room shrinks until your nose hits a wall. Skip school and men with ledgers turn your laughter into labor. These aren't cosmic curses, they're systems. Collodi turns morality into cause and effect you can test. Touch stove, get burned. Touch it twice, get scars that change how you carry water. Crucially, mercy never floats. It lands with terms. Fire eater's coins scorch. The fairy's soup comes with school. The tunny's kindness pays back a rescue. None of this is mystical, it's social math. You can't withdraw dignity without deposits of effort. That's why the final transformation happens quietly. After months of carrying buckets, the puppet wakes human and the old shell slumps like a receipt. He isn't rewarded for feeling sorry, he's recognized for becoming useful. So why does it still bite? Because our dopamine economies look a lot like Collodi's traps with better branding. The land of toys is a feed that refreshes. Cigars and candy are screens and loot boxes. Influencers with fox smiles pitch passive income while they sell attention futures. The algorithm doesn't hang you from oaks, it just takes your hours and sells them at scale. Boys still turn into beasts of burden, only now the bray is a notification ping. Parenting shifted from command to coaching, and coaching can be good until it removes friction. Collodi's ledger says friction is instruction. Let your kid fall, help them stand, demand repair, model work. Replace consequence with constant rescue, and you raise children ready for Disney's world, then send them into Collodi's. The mismatch hurts. His book closes that gap with scenes you can't unsee. Translations softened him. Editors trimmed the oak, scrubbed the courtroom, sweetened the fairy. International success required gentleness, but Italian classrooms knew better. Generations read the serial bite by bite and wrote letters begging for mercy because they believed a writer could kill a puppet and meant it. That tension, reader pleading, author judging, kept attention like a drum. He invented cliffhangers that double as moral pauses, the 19th century version of the 30-second rule. There's also the craft. Motifs, rope, fire, coins, feet recur like chords. Each returns with interest. Burn your feet for warmth, later walk miles for someone else. Waste coins, later save and give them away. Lie with your face, later wear your truth as labor's calluses. The structure teaches pattern recognition. Vice attracts predators, virtue attracts responsibility. Neither is glamorous, both are predictable. Some push back, isn't this too hard on kids? Collodi answers with a shrug that respects them. Children notice hypocrisy. They know when adults sell easy answers. He writes to their competence. He trusts they can handle cold rooms, hunger, and the idea that love may arrive with chores attached. That trust dignifies them more than sugar ever will. And in a world that still punishes the naive and rewards the patient slowly, his brutality reads as love shaped like warning. He didn't hate children. He worried they wouldn't survive. His story arms them, not with stars to wish on, but with spines to carry weight. Scenes Disney hid. Rapid-fire micro-stories. Hammer thud, then quiet. The talking cricket's voice stops mid-warning, and the room holds its breath. A boy stares at a cracked wall where counsel used to be. Conscience, it turns out, breaks. The oak groans in a night that doesn't care. Rope bites. Feet kick air that won't help. You can call it justice or murder. The branch doesn't pick a side. He moved no more. The newspaper goes dark for a week. Jeppetto's blue lips at a window that leaks wind. He pawns his coat for an ABC book. The shop bell rings like a verdict. Outside, Winter laughs and takes what's left. A street vendor waves tickets. Letters fall quiet. The book leaves his hand with barely a fight. Later, the theater's applause sticks to his skin like sugar that won't wash off. Bread crusts count as supper. Pear cores become philosophy. He eats the skins because waste means hunger twice, today and tomorrow. The pit hits the bowl like a promise to do better he won't keep yet. Backstage, fire eater coughs smoke and mercy in the same breath. Harlequin trembles. Pinocchio says, "Burn me instead." 2 tears sizzle at the end of a beard that scares him anyway. 5 gold coins land in a palm not built for saving. The wait sings a song of shortcuts. In the doorway, a fox hears music no one else admits is playing. The inn's bill arrives with compliments. The cat sleeps with one eye closed and counts. Pinocchio pays, flattered to be generous. Somewhere a ledger smiles. Black masks step out of a hedge with knives that shine without caring. He clamps treasure under his tongue and shakes his head. A frying pan warms up to melt his resolve. The blue-haired child in a window candlelit like a vigil. "I'm waiting for my coffin," she says, and doesn't open the door. Hope sometimes watches without helping. Rope again. This time a rescue party arrives late and strange. Poodle coachman, odd attendants, a carriage that shouldn't exist. The knot loosens. Breath returns on loan. Doctors circle like birds at a field's edge. The crow and the owl debate. The cricket's ghost calls him foolish, not doomed. His nose interrupts them all by growing. Woodpeckers peck penance. He cries and learns that truth hurts less than the cleanup for lies. Soup follows honesty the way day follows night when you let it. A magistrate listens to his story of theft and gullibility, nods gravely, and jails him 4 months for being a fool. The lock clicks, the lesson echoes in the hall. An amnesty frees true criminals. He pleads to be counted among them and walks out into air that hasn't changed its price. Dawn finds an empty hole where his fortune should be. A farmer ties him like a dog for stealing grapes. He works the rows with a stomach that keeps time. At dusk, the knot leaves a mark that won't fade quickly. Lampwick's laugh cracks into a bray. Ears bloom soft and wrong. Boys bargain with men holding ropes designed for animals, not arguments. Circus lights paint bruises prettier than they feel. A stick teaches jumps the hard way. The crowd claps for pain they paid for. Cold surf pulls him down with a stone on his neck. Fish strip a skin he never asked to wear. He surfaces lighter, shaking, ashamed. Inside the dogfish, a candle draws 2 lives together. Jeppetto's hands won't stop shaking, but his smile holds. They walk out through breath that could crush them and don't look back. A tunny fish offers its back without ceremony. Kindness circles and arrives when your legs say no. Shore receives them, rough and fair. A jar on a shelf clicks with each coin that doesn't become candy. The sound grows addictive in the right way. A fevered child sweats in a doorway. Pinocchio empties the jar and feels richer. The fairy watches, content to let arithmetic teach. Buckets carve welts into shoulders that stiffen into pride. Windows patch. Soup warms. Shame loosens its grip one chore at a time. Night settles. On a chair, a puppet slumps like a tool retired. In the bed, a boy wakes to a heartbeat he earned. No wand, no song, just breath steady deserved. Modern echoes. Why this story still bites. Back to the gallows, because that's the part we keep trying to erase. The rope isn't just 19th century cruelty. It's a warning label we keep peeling off our lives. Collodi's stakes hit now because our traps got prettier, not kinder. The land of toys didn't close. It moved into our pockets and turned on notification. Think about how the place worked. No clocks, no chores, fun made mandatory. That's an economy of dopamine. Infinite scroll is a midway that never shuts. Streaks and loot boxes are cigars handed out at the gate. The prize wall shifts just enough to keep you paying with minutes you swear you're not giving away. For boys then, work was outlawed. For us, focus is. And the bill is the same. You start to sound less like yourself. Not with brays, just with phrases that came pre-chewed. The fox and the cat didn't retire either. They scaled. Their field of miracles is make money while you sleep. 10x your audience. One secret they don't want you to know. Influencer grifts pitch harvest without seasons, yield without soil. A limp becomes a I've been through it brand, and a blink turns into vulnerability content. The promise is evergreen because the need is. If you're tired and broke and ashamed, Plant here feels merciful. Collodi wasn't mocking hunger. He was mapping the way hunger warps math. Work and dignity, remember how those 2 words fused by the time Pinocchio carried water? That promise is harder to find now. Automation trims tasks, platforms rent our attention back to us, wages freeze while everything priced in coins gets heavier. The grind still builds a spine, but the market pays less for it. That's part of why Disney's Wish still sells. When a ledger looks rigged, magic sounds fair. So parenting shifts. We moved from command to coaching, from do this to how do you feel about doing this? Some of that is good. Kids aren't machines, but consequences didn't vanish just because we stopped naming them sharply. Collodi's ledger says friction is instruction. Don't remove all stakes, help pay the ones that teach. He writes a child failing hard without a safety net because the world outside his pages often looked like that. Ours isn't gentler by default. It's just better at hiding the costs until later. What happens when stories lower the stakes? You get comfort that travels well and lessons that don't. Be brave, truthful, unselfish is fine on a poster. It's thin under pressure. Carry water every day, keep promises when no one's looking, repay mercy with service doesn't sell tickets. It does, however, keep roofs intact. Collodi's version bites because he puts the boring virtues on the main stage and lets applause happen off-screen. And he's honest about systems. The judge who jails a robbed boy for being a fool is bureaucracy on a slow Friday. The circus that beats a donkey into tricks is any industry that treats talent like consumable inventory. The coachman buying laughs wholesale is the platform buying childhood in chunks and reselling it as views. We didn't invent these mechanics, we optimized them. Which is why his mercy still matters. It never floats. Fire eater's tears cost soot. The fairy's soup buys a contract. The tunny fish returns a debt because kindness earlier wasn't branding, it was help. That cycle is the one we can still build on. Set terms, keep them. Teach kids that forgiveness restores opportunities, not guarantees outcomes. It's slower, it's sturdy. If the land of toys is a feed, you need friction by design, bedtimes, chores, attention that isn't for sale. If the fox is a funnel, you need questions that puncture the pitch. What's the work? Where's the risk? Who eats the loss? If school feels like a room that shrinks your energy, you need teachers who can tell you why letters matter when the roof leaks, and you need roofs that don't. Collodi also gives us a language for shame that isn't fatal. Nose grows, woodpeckers peck, you cry, you fix it, you go to school tomorrow. That loop is healthier than the modern flip. Deny, perform, double down, get cancelled, rebrand. He makes confession practical. Tell the truth because it lets you move again. And the final image he leaves, the puppet on the chair like a receipt, that's the part that still startles. We keep looking for a wand. He keeps pointing to a ledger closed by use. He says, become useful and the world might not love you, but it will rely on you, and that reliance will make you real in a way applause can't. In a culture that sells shortcuts and identities by the dozen, that's a biting claim. So when the rope creaks at the start of his story, he's not being cruel for sport. He's starting where too many lives end when no one names the trap. He drags you through the worst version so the better one feels reachable. Not because you wished hard enough, but because, day after day, you chose the road that doesn't film well and walked it anyway. Craft choices. How Collodi engineered retention. While we've been tracking the boy, pay attention to the hand on the wheel. Collodi wasn't just telling a tale, he was engineering attention in weekly doses for readers who could vanish between installments. His trick: he built a moral machine that runs on cliffhangers, motifs, and micro-conflicts, each calibrated to make you turn the page and write the editor demanding the next one. Start with serialization. Ending a chapter with a puppet swinging from an oak wasn't cruelty alone, it was a letter-generating device. He moved no more, lit up a newsroom with mail. Parents wrote, kids begged. The story lived outside the paper because the paper cut off the breath mid-gasp. That's retention. Stop at the inhale, sell the exhale next week. He'd worked in journalism. He knew how deadlines and outrage keep ink paid for. Inside each chapter, he practiced a 19th century version of the 30-second rule, no scene without a micro-conflict. Jeppetto and Mastro Cherry don't simply carve, they bicker, pride versus need, kindness versus irritation. Pinocchio doesn't merely walk, he collides with a drummer, a juggler, a judge, a farmer, each moment forcing a decision. Even kindness comes barbed. Fire Eater's mercy is wrapped in smoke, soot, and the fear he might change his mind. The fairy's soup tastes like a contract. There's no flat kindness, no flat danger. Everything demands a choice now. Motifs do the rest, old-world objects tuned like instruments. Hunger keeps the tempo, coins set the key. Rope, fire, and feet mark transitions. Rope means consequence close enough to touch. Fire means warmth with a bill. Feet mean agency, burn them and you'll crawl, harden them and you'll carry. Each return is a callback and a ratchet. You recognize the object, then feel it tight. That recognition is easy to follow across weeks of publication. You don't need a recap. Your body remembers rope creaking, noses growing, coins clinking. Notice his moral algorithm, simple inputs, reliable outputs. Lie, therefore the room shrinks. Skip school, therefore a predator appears. Show mercy, therefore help returns at scale. The therefore matters, it's never and then. He links beat to beat with cause and effect you can test at home. That's why the lessons stick without sermons. A boy hears don't lie and shrugs. A boy hears a story where lies literally block movement, and he measures distances differently when it's his turn to choose. He also exploits dramatic irony with care. What nobody knew at the time sits in the margins. Readers know the fox and cat are assassins while Pinocchio insists they're friends. We sit in dread and superiority at once, two fuels that burn slowly but hot. He drops small details that bloom chapters later. Coins under the tongue, a tunny fish saved on a beach, a door that doesn't open because a child in a candlelit window claims she's waiting for a coffin. Each stray kindness or refusal pays out later, interest compounded by memory. Time jumps sharpen edges. 3 days earlier isn't a flourish, it's a reset that reloads tension. He'll cut from a rope creaking to doctors debating, from a prison lock to an amnesty bell, from a candle in a belly to a cold shore. The jumps deny closure just long enough to keep the pulse up, then deliver it in diagonals, not straight lines. Meanwhile, parallel action widens the world. While Pinocchio is planting coins, Jeppetto is drifting toward a mouth that inhales boats. The story is bigger than the boy. The boy's choices still drive it. He knows tone is a lever. Black comedy diffuses panic just enough to let a child keep reading through fear. A magistrate jailing a victim for being gullible is funny in the way bureaucracy is funny when it's not happening to you and terrifying when it is. He'll let you laugh, then close the hand. 4 months, small cell, lesson absorbed in the dark. That rhythm, laugh, flinch, think, keeps pages turning without numbness. Even language works like a hook. Short declaratives hammer points, sudden lyrical images, lantern glow in a monster's belly open the lens. He writes food, rope, wood, breath, no abstractions more than needed. A child can follow, an adult can't shrug it off. When he does go abstract, usefulness, obedience, sacrifice, he immediately anchors it to soup, coats, buckets. Ideas arrive with handles. Finally, his payoffs. He never lets a broken promise disappear. If Pinocchio swears to be home by evening and wanders, something sharp waits at nightfall. Cold floors, empty chairs, a note on a table that changes the week. If he saves, the jar clicks. If he gives, the jar empties and the world answers with trust. The receipts accumulate until that last morning when the story cashes them in with almost no words. The puppet on the chair is the neatest payoff you can write. No speech, no sermon, just an image that says the account is closed. It's not magic, it's engineering. Cliff at the top, micro-conflict every few paragraphs, motifs as chords you can hum, cause and effect as rails, irony as current, jumps as jolts, payoffs as proof. He wrote to keep boys alive and keep them reading. The craft serves both plans, which is why a century and change later, you can still feel the pull, line by line, week by week, nose by inch. Resolution and meaning. Collodi's Pinocchio isn't about magic. It's about earning a self the slow way with work that adds up and mercy that sets terms. If you want the next hidden history, darker, stranger, closer than the version you grew up with, watch our deep dive on The Little Mermaid's Lost Tale. Subscribe for the stories under the stories, the parts marketing cut out.